Okay, recording for the Galactic Shaman Astrologers. We're going to meet around the third house in astrology, which is traditionally known as the house of the goddess. So if you check the blog that I've most recently written, that is really a compilation at galacticshamanastrologers.net of everyone in the group's ideas and input and sharing that we all did. And when I write my blogs, I don't always give credit to the Galactic Shaman Astrologers, but this is really my tribe. This is the group that I communicate with, which is very third house topic. And it's from their participation that I manage to do these videos. I get ideas for the blog, and a lot of what I do with my clients comes from their knowledge. So I want you to realize that. And then the blog before this one, which was on the magical vulva. So the magical vulva is such a fabulous title that actually Daniel had the input for. The man of the group gave us that fabulous history. Before that one was about Mars, and Holly had indicated how Mars really, his mythology was that he came from Flora, the goddess of flowers, and that it was his deep rootedness in the feminine that allows him to be so masculine. So when we're talking about the house of the goddess today, none of this is about squashing men. So I just want to be really clear about this. This is not like me attempting to like raise up the goddess because we're attempting to squash men. Actually, the perspective I have is that the last whatever age of patriarchal kind of energy was terrible for men, and that by coming back to the goddess, we're also raising up the masculine, and that like Mars, a strong feminine is what allows his masculine to be so passionate. Okay? So in astrology, a lot of interventions have happened, which we're trying to clear up by doing the houses. So what we're using, and I drew this for Lalita Astrology, is we're using a chart system where Cancer is the first house of the self, and the third house, which we're talking about today, is Virgo, which is feminine earth. Okay. Opposite to that is Pisces, which is what, when we did the video on Comet Neowise, we talked about the whole last age, and the Piscean age was really like the house of God, like the masculine, the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost, the masculine. And where we're going, allegedly, okay, and I don't know that this is where we're actually going, but as far as I can tell, we're going into an idle time in the 8th house ruled by Aquarius. So we did the first video on the 8th house so that you can get the idea of that 8th house energy. But what's coming up for me is that because the last age was Pisces, which is the 9th house of God, the sun, and the more masculine energy of God the Father who lives in the clouds up there somewhere in the sky. I think that part of the transition that we're going through right now is the polarity of that and back to the house of the goddess. So when I think about the third house, I think about early education. Where did you learn things? Did you learn it from a natural environment, or like kids today, most of it's done on the internet? But in traditional astrology, the third house was like your local environment, nature, outside, the seasons, and the feast or famine based on the cycles of the moon and the seasons, and what seeds were saved and what crops were available, which is very much Virgo. Okay, the seed of the Virgin, Virgo, is that third house content. So if you watch our video Comet Neowise, I talk about how money is something I would never trade for the seed. And the seed is really important in terms of the goddess. So the third house is also considered divination, just like the ninth house is considered divination. But the divination from the third house is more, I feel like, looking to the earth and seeing what the earth is experiencing, and then knowing that that is what we will be experiencing. So looking to see how the weather is, looking to see the water supply, the insects, the mushrooms on the tree, or the lack of mushrooms because it's very dry. So the divination that happened in the third house was around those natural cycles. And I hope we can get into some of that today. Also, the rituals, the sacred rites had much to do with nature, with Mother Nature, so that anyone with strong third house content, like when I was a child, all I did was rituals. I went out in nature and I would do like what I call pujas with like different plants and stones, and I'd set up altars and I'd light a sacred fire and I would smoke, like as a little kid. I would smoke herbs and different things. Like all the rituals were like under cedar trees. And I would lay on the earth and I would like invite the animals. There was nobody else. Like the deer would come and I would see the birds and I would listen for the wind and I would like do these sacred rites as a little girl. So that's kind of the early childhood learning of the third house. It's also how your tribe or your grandmother or your siblings communicate to you. So if you live in the streets of New York City, you get a very different language than if you live in rural Western New York, where I grew up. So that when you come from that local community, you're also building your early education of what's important to you, how you see the world, and so forth. So it's 11:11 now, and the moon is just 13 degrees removed from the new moon, and that moon phase is called the first appearance. And Demetra said that that 13 degrees was really important to the goddess and goddess cultures because they had this actual worry and concern that maybe the moon wouldn't appear again. And so the 13 degrees first appearance, that number 13 was the number of the goddess. And the moon cycle, very important to ancient cultures. So there was the corn moon, there was the wolf moon, there was the trees popping moon when the trees were all snapping because it was so cold. And ancient calendars were based on the moon. So that is also like the third house. The way we study, the way we do cycles, the way we count, early language, whether we speak or we use hand, movements to talk and express, that's all third house. So why don't we just have people tell really basically their understanding of the third house? What is the third house for you that you want to teach and explain to all of the people who watch our videos? What is it that I've missed that you want to share? Go ahead, jump in, please, quick.
I'll jump in. Hello, I'll jump in. Can you hear me? Is that okay?
Yeah, you're good, Emily.
Good. So I like the descriptions of the third house, and it's really good to see it in the form of the goddess, and not just through. For me, I have Mercury in my third house, so I can easily see that as just about communication. because it's really strong there for me. And um, what really, like, for example, today, what I've been doing all day is spending time with kids. And it just makes me think about, the way we imagine as a child and the way we learn through imagination and play. Um, and it's an interesting mix with Mercury retrograde, because it feels like that's where that's happening as well, through the imagination realm and that expression and communication. So yeah, so what does it look like to play in nature and to communicate through those realms and sort of through the veil? I guess, how does it look like to teach the trust and the safety for kids to be able to do that? To be able to develop a relationship with going outside, particularly when it's cold. Like today, it's got a lot colder. And one of the children I was with this morning she didn't want to go out, probably because it was cold. So it's very much, it's a different mentality when the other child I was with was fine with going outside. So the difference in how to develop that close-footedness to the earth seems important. So for me, my third house is connected a lot to my ninth house, because I have two planets, Mercury and then Mars in the ninth, at the same degree opposite each other. So I feel a really kind of like an hourglass that's tipping up and down between the two, a real kind of like a conflict in a way, and a transition. It's sort of like two rams coming against each other in my experience, of how, dealing with understanding the ninth house as the kingdom, the God head, but bringing that down into the earth, and how to bring and squish, mingle and dance those things together without it being a conflict. Because in me, it's still working out the conflict. There's like a real anger there. You raped and pillaged the womb of the earth of the goddess, so you're going to get it. You Roman Empire. And that's very much like how it resonates for me, and very military. And so there's this military goddess like getting it back into gear, but that's it's not very much how I want to be. So it's figuring out that balance. So I feel like with the picture you got behind you as well, with the womb, it's so sacred. It's so like grounded in the earth. But it's very much that communication between the two houses, how to transition that. Yeah. So I'm sure there's more I could say, but I'll pass it through so we can continue.
One of the things that I'm going to meet with Emmeline about this week is her third house, ninth house tipping, that polarity that is like the hourglass. And one of the crises that I'm hearing more from my clients lately when we're doing the deep shadow work is, because Neptune is in Pisces right now, we're experiencing like the full crisis of illusion around the Piscean age. Much of it is that, and I've perpetrated that, I've definitely been lost in all of that golden age, fifth dimensional stuff. And the ninth house can get very lost in like angels and messiahs and gurus. So the ninth house is also like the guru, the wise teacher, someone who is like more skilled and capable, is the ninth house, which is how the last age made like Archangel Michael is going to fight Lucifer and we're all going to be saved because he's going to kill the devil. And that was one of the archetypes that actually the Yoga Sutras, which was written 2,000 years ago, really strongly advised against. And this is interesting to me because as a yoga practitioner, which was also very deeply rooted in my earth experience, like as a child, I did yoga postures spontaneously. And I feel like the third house is also your actual physical body. I mean, the first house is your body, but the third house is like how your body communicates in your environment. So like Emmeline was talking about, if you can go out in the cold, if you can put on the right clothes and go do a ceremony in October, can you sit in a sweat lodge? Is it okay to be really in your physical body and communicate with nature? I feel like part of that is third house stuff. So the Yoga Sutras actually said that we should be very careful of being seduced by celestial beings. And I definitely reached that point where I was completely seduced by star beings and being a star seed and being Pleiadian and star Merkabas coming into my bedroom and having these galactic experiences. And then I realized those were pure cocaine. Those were like an addiction. Those were my pride. That was me like trying to be the guru somehow, separating myself because I was going to be fifth dimensional. And I was going to bifurcate away from my family who was not, quote, awake. And I realized that was the whole separation game again. Like that was the divide and conquer separation game again. So I've been coming away from that. And if you read my blog over the last year, I've been explaining how that mass hallucination of spaceships was the moving away from the goddess. Basically, Terence McKenna said that the mass hallucination of spaceships has been going on for thousands of years. And that is the moving away from that earthy, physical experience that we're here for on Earth, which is the house of the goddess. And this saying from the Yoga Sutras, which was from 2,000 years ago, was that these celestial beings will lure the yogi to her doom. And it said that angels actually are traps, and to distance ourselves from these divine temptations. So a lot of my clients who are having like the dark night of the soul right now are realizing that those were traps, that all those channeled messages from some galactic council or some angelic being were actually traps. And then they find out that that is how other bad things happened in their life, was they got very focused on this ninth house celestial being part of the starseed group, and then the shit was hitting the fan over there. So I feel like I've never understood this before like I understand it now, that the ninth house is Pisces, and I never really got it like I'm getting it now. And that when Neptune has been transiting there since 2012, that's when this stuff really happened, like that we were going to be reunited with our cosmic family and that we would be part of first contact. And that is the doom of the third house, of getting really into Earth and being part of the mystery school that Earth is. That's why we're here. And I want to hear what other people have to say about that, but I needed to point that out. Like a lot of my clients are going through a really heavy, dark night of the soul because they thought they were the light. They thought they were connected to angels and celestials, and now they're going, wow, that doesn't mean anything because there's methane gas rising up under the permafrost melting that potentially is going to infect us all with another pandemic. So let's see where people want to go with that right now.
I'll go if that's all right.
Yeah.
I have the North Node in the third house, which is Scorpio for me, and Pluto is conjunct my North Node. So I guess I find it quite difficult because it feels like everything comes back to this like false image. I guess similar to what you were saying about the Piscean illusion, and then the destruction of that image, which is perhaps like not very popular or comfortable to talk about. I don't know. I just think that there's a lot of stuff like tied up in kind of goddess veneration that seems a bit perhaps ill-advised or it has like unintended consequences perhaps, and a lot of that's tied up into like new age spirituality and like certain other ideas to do with, you know, fifth dimension and everything else. I just think we have like a tendency to latch on to the latest messiah, and it's one thing to like move from the messiah being a kind of patriarchal god figure, which is maybe the ninth house, and then you can just as easily make the third house into a messiah perhaps. Yeah, I just wonder, I think part of this is like colored by, like my perception is colored by the way that my chart is set up, obviously. So I've got Venus and Taurus up in the ninth house. And when I think about it, there's like a lot of different elements to it, but one of them could be this whole message of, you know, we have to get grounded or we have to get agricultural. I don't think that's really enough. If you just stay on the surface of the earth, that's quite perhaps comfortable. You have to like be willing to descend into the underworld, which is, I guess, my Pluto there. And then you kind of have a choice. I don't think you have a choice of like descending. It's like, it's going to happen, but then you get to choose how you experience that. So do you want to be kind of the naive Persephone who thinks that she, you know, didn't have a part in choosing this and kind of plays out this victim role? Or you could be like Aristotle who chooses to descend, and then she kind of is able to reclaim a lot of power through that and kind of go through a lot of illusions and shed a lot of stuff. So there's like a big choice point there perhaps, which will probably, you know, strip away quite a lot of illusions while you're at it. I don't know. I guess I feel like in this really Neptunian space quite a lot recently, funnily enough, because it's applying an aspect to my ascendant in my natal chart. But it's just like, how deep can we go, like peeling back layers of illusion? Or are we going to just trade kind of one messiah complex for another? Like, are we going to just trade the god of the last age in for this goddess of a new age that's going to magically fix everything, you know? And then it comes back to this whole thing of like, is that some kind of external being that's going to save us? And I think that kind of relates to stuff we've talked about Cancer and Capricorn. So it's interesting that there's like so much activity in Capricorn right now. I see kind of that like false goddess image, or however you want to phrase it, as being quite Cancerian or connecting to the moon or Sirius, because the Sirius stars are there in Cancer. And it kind of ties into that chimera idea of birthing this child that you think is repugnant or horrible. You want to just kind of put it away and not look at this thing that you've created. You know, it's kind of like a lot of different interconnected threads there, but I guess maybe as well it's like the triplicate goddess. If you kind of ignore the crone or like the ugly Capricorn Pan aspect of it, and you just want to focus on the goddess as, you know, the mother or the child, kind of the Persephone energy and stuff like that. That thing that you call ugly, or you kind of like, if you call the wisdom of the crone ugly and you kind of try to ignore it, it's like an Wetico term. You kind of just make the shadow of that amplify, and it creates this even like more hideous sea goat kind of Capricorn creature.
Are you done, Daniel? That's so awesome. I really love what Daniel has to say. Because he really does shake the whole thing up, which I adore. So this is like, he's able to articulate the Scorpio third house of his, you know, with Pluto and the North Node there. It's like let's make sure that we also recognize the deep, dark, shadowy abyss of the feminine and its role in also being a victim and, you know, handing over its power really to the patriarchy and then blaming the patriarchy. I mean, there's so much that I heard Daniel say, and not to make the goddess the external messiah, but to really realize that Daniel's also brought again and again to the group that the age of Aquarius is not particularly necessarily like the ascent into, it is the dawning of the age of Aquarius. Like, that is wrong, folks. And one of my clients asked me to listen to a video this morning about this female guru named Lakshmi, who was talking about how we were going into this golden age. And I just, the whole of it was like, I was so repulsed. I was just gonna gag. And she was talking about the financial crisis, because Lakshmi is the goddess of money. So it's all about how everything hinged on the financial crisis. And I was going, no, that's the hideous part of the goddess to me, is that money, wealth, Lakshmi stuff that we also don't want to make into the messiah of the golden age, where we're all going to have hundreds of $1 million that Saint Germain hid under the catacombs of France, which I was really into for a while. And I keep going back to my memories and deleting everything about Saint Germain and these money that's allegedly coming to us. So I think the important thing is to realize that Aquarius may in fact be the idle phase of a very long fallow period, that it may not be this golden age that a lot of people have been talking about. When the Age of Aquarius song came out, Neptune was in Scorpio, water sign, and we all got really fantasizing around that at that point also. So I know I didn't repeat back what Daniel said exactly, but just everyone listen to it and listen to it again, because his point is really important there, okay? Who else wants to jump in now?
Yeah, I'll jump in. So my third house is really jam-packed, as well as my ninth. So I was really relating to what people were saying with the balancing of the two, and my south nodes in the ninth and my north nodes in the third. And mine is quite dark. I have a lot of I have Mars there, and I have my Black Moon Lilith, and it's very like that rooted, deep rage. And I think it really does root back to, I think Lolita's explained it to me, as like that cutting of the tree, of that feminine tree of life that got cut down basically and ripped away. And there's the deep rooted pain of that for me. And I'm trying to like work it out as I go. And I really see like the third house with the moon being the joy of the third house. Like Lily says, I really see it as like the cycles, and like that really that deeper way of like relating to the cycles of your life, the cycles of nature, and like connecting that all together. And I read this, I'm reading a book at the moment, and I read about the nature of twins, and the dual nature of the feminine psyche and the masculine psyche, and then that together, in that we all have this outer self that's very like in the top side world, very out there, and then we have this deeper self that's more like creature based and more rooted and more primal and instinctual self. And often when we haven't got that instinctual self and outer self balanced, it can become really lopsided. And actually thinking about that, if that feels very ninth house and third house, with like the ninth house being out there in the top side, in the sun, you know, and then the third house being that deep, dark, creaturey, to the earth kind of being, and with siblings being representing in the third house as well, that felt really strong, that dual nature that together is strong. You know, there is, yeah, like you were saying, with there is just this one. Yeah, there isn't. There's the dual nature that we need to really embrace, and I think that's what the third house is teaching, is like, how can we embrace the darkness and be that. And I was reading about how it's Selene and Helios, which are the goddesses of those houses, and how they would meet in the sky together and travel together, and they were siblings. And that's really interesting as well. I was reading about that. So yeah, it's a lot of depth going on here, and I think that this is the time to really recognize the third house as the root, the root of the tree of life. Yeah, so back to you.
Well, just repeat, the root of the tree of life is a fabulous way to consider the third house. And well, because, you know, Daniel and Beth Ann have joined more recently, they're really starting to recognize their own charts as the way they see the world. And people who watch our videos should realize that your chart is how you will give the gift to humankind. You're the cell in the consciousness of humankind that needs to complete that task. So knowing your chart really well, like Daniel, you know, may feel like farming and all of those things are not the way, but that may be because of the condition of his series. And he may also feel like the deep descent with Pluto at the North Node is the way. Like, I feel like the third house is the descent and the ninth house is the ascent, the descent, the ascent. And then what I also heard from Beth Ann is like, we're all part animals here. And I've written blogs and posts before that, like, to me, the animals are the angels. Like, truly, when I see like a chakra system based on the angels, which I have seen, like, it's all like the light and bright and beautiful savior angels, but I want to know where Lucifer is in that chart. Like, for me, I'm like, how come Lucifer is not on the chakra system? Okay. Because Lucifer took the deep descent. To me, Lucifer's the big deal. Lucifer took the fall. The rest of them are like, whatever. Yeah, you had it nice. Lucifer took the fall. And that's the way I see that third house too, is like the ultimate descent is the mystery school, not becoming like master whatever. I'm going to throw those cards away. I'm done with those cards. My angel cards, into the fire. My ascended master cards, into the fire. How's that for a reckoning? Go ahead. Who wants to talk now?
I'll talk about my third house a bit. I have third house is my Leo house, and I have Mars there in retrograde. So for me, it's a little bit of the balancing of both, because it's the house of the joy of the moon, and yet I have it dominated in a sun sign, in a fixed sign. So it's for me, feeling like the balancing of those two energies a lot. You know, and in my chart, you know, I have a setting sun, and I have a moon that is kind of in her down at the bottom of the chart in the really dark phase as well. So my chart is a little bit set up to move away from the sun daylight side of things and into the night side of things. And yet I have Mars there in retrograde, which is this kind of, angry, and it's the out of sect malefic in my chart, because I do have a day chart, even though my sun is setting, it's still well above the horizon. So that is like the place of where the most malefic potentially things in my life could stem from. So it is a bit, and my sun is in the 8th house of death, idle things. So there are always is this interplay in my life of really good things there, and then like not so good things. It's like well, the sun, but then there's this overtone of like a death cycle. So I think I'm very aware of like the changing of the seasons and that kind of stuff. And with just my locality and my, I don't feel close to my siblings. I feel like that Mars there is part of that. And with like local travel, I'm like super accident prone, just like very practical things. And yet that Mars in the sign of the sun, Leo, like I don't get angry often, but when I do, it really like, it is just inflaming. And yet at the same time, because it's such an esoteric house, I do have that Martian drive to study those things, to defend those things. And my lot of fortune actually is in the 9th house, and they're slightly opposite. And in some ways that's the Mars can impact my overall fortune, and the lot of fortune is based on the moon. But in the other way, it's also that balancing of things and it keeps me very much tied to wanting to be in the cycles of the rhythms of the earth. And so sometimes I kind of get away from conceptualizing it as God and goddess, or just kind of like physicality and like mental spaces. But at the same time, I kind of go back and forth there. And because it's such and it's such a communication spaced, I can really talk a lot when I get excited about a subject. But then I just mostly really internalize it as well. So, yeah, that's all.
That's great. So you hear everyone interpreting their chart. The other thing that Holly shared a writing about how to interpret. Now, this was my take on it, and I'm actually going to ask the Galactic Shaman astrologers to try and figure this out at some point. But so in your natal chart, the 3rd house will be some sign. So we'll use mine as an example so I can explain it to you, because you've all seen my chart this week. I put my 3rd through my 12th house in a screenshot. So my 3rd house is Sagittarius. So the ruler of Sagittarius is Jupiter, which is found at my ascendant. So the other way to interpret your 3rd house is the ruler of the sign of your 3rd house. What house is it working in? And that's kind of your responsibility for the tribe, the communication, the ritual, the sacred rites, the cycles, the Mother Earth kind of natural cycles, Virgo being the saving of the seed. And if you've watched any of my videos, Jupiter's at my ascendant, I'm a seed saver. Like I have envelopes and envelopes and envelopes of seeds. And so in order to complete the mission of your life, you also want to figure out what is the ruler of that 3rd house and what house is that planet doing its work. So, everyone can have time to think about that and study that and figure that. But if the ruler of your third house, like mine is Jupiter at the ascendant, is like my very life breath to do that Mother Earth spirituality. Plus, Jupiter's in mutual reception with Venus, the ruler of my ascendant, in my third house, such that the steers celestial Venus of my chart, she's steering my life so that I look like I'm some like crazy permaculture lady, like back to nature forest person. But if I'm going to breathe and Jupiter rules that third house and Jupiter's on my ascendant, I have to do that. I'm like the tribal leader. And in my local community, so if you look in your zip code, in my local community, everybody knows that's who I am. Everyone knows I'm the big permaculture expert. I'm the farm to school coordinator. I'm the seed saver. If anyone has questions about how to plant something, they will come to me. They'll drive by our house and go, wow, look at that. If we could just do that. So in your experience, also the ruler of your third house, say it's in the fifth house, like, I don't know where, I can't figure out Emmeline's right now in my head, but she was talking about children, you know, so you may be a teacher, you may be, if that were the case, do you understand? Or if the ruler of your third house is in your ninth, then you may very well be more ninth house oracular type of information is more important to you. And for me to say I'm going to throw my like ascended master cards in the fire, which I've done many times because I love to like, I have Uranus in the first house. I love to like create shit storms as often as possible. And I remember last year I put a bunch of books in the fire. Oh my gosh, so many people unfriended me. They were horrified. Why are you burning books? Well, that's my thing too. I can't help it. I create shitstorm. I'm kind of the fool that hangs herself to get other people thinking. And that is also the nature of a shaman. See, I think third house is very like shaman oriented. And a shaman makes questions about consensus reality. That is what a shaman is. They make everybody question consensus reality. So yeah, look at that for yourself, or whatever anyone else wants to talk about. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question to the group, or just amusing. So if we have the angel scenario, how does that work with kind of embody? So so the third house is embodiment. How can we embody this angel scenario in a more earthy way that's not exactly like burning it all forever, maybe burning something about it, but how do we like bring it back together in terms of like this cosmic being that lives on whatever that's called Archangel Michael, but is also called Bernard or something? Like how do we like embody that, so that because I think when we have this whole Messiah complex thing, we're so escapist using it. So going out into that space and being like, I'm gonna stay at home and I'm just gonna meditate and then all's gonna be fine. But then we realize, like you said, that a weird paving thing is happening outside and that the gas is coming out. But how do we have the meditating space, but do that together with being conscious and being outside, without throwing some of it away? Because I'm thinking like it can't be right to completely throw it away, because then it's kind of a rebellion. Well, I guess we need a rebellion of sorts, but then what next after the rebellion? I think about that a lot, because with my Mars in the ninth, it really wants to like provoke, but I'm always like, I feel like that's kind of what creates more of a duality. So I don't know my way. I'm still working with that, really. It feels really like karmic. in my body. Because I could go outside into this town, which is a Roman town, and I could just yell at the cathedral because it makes me angry to look at it sometimes. But then that isn't helping, and there's people and souls there. So yeah, it's really like trying for me, figuring out that balance. Holly, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes for me back to the first house and understanding your first house, because that is yourself. And that is where, in that moment where you take your first breath at birth, that realm of spirit is coming into the realm of body. And so remember, the third house and the ninth house are both configured to the ascendant. Okay. And so I'm just trying to do this in my head. Is that a sextile from the third and a trine to the ninth? Yeah. So you're getting these energies pulling in, and so that you look to see what's going on with your first house and your ascendant and how those are relating to your third and your ninth house. So for me, just thinking of my chart is I have all that, like, because my Mars in the third is retrograde, I actually have a lot of repressed anger. I don't exude it very well. But knowing my chart, I can know that, and I can make those angry points more conscious. That sextile helps me more easily express, and this is some of my life's work, to move that angry energy out of my body and speak it out. And then the ninth house, which for me is Aquarius, helps me think of outside of the box ways to express. That's the mind. So one of the things that I'm working on is moving through the mind and thinking in original ways or outside of the box ways to express this energy, because a lot of my anger is not so much at conceptual things, but it is at very practical things that frustrate me, like when systems don't work at my workplace. And then I'm like, this could be done so much better, and I get angry. But for much of my life, I don't always speak that anger because I'm kind of a quiet, shy personality at setup. But that's kind of my life work. And actually through like secondary progression, that Mars has actually moved into my first house. And what is happening in my life is I am becoming more and more vocal about my things that frustrate me, anger me, that I want to, like, not necessarily make a war about, but where I see there's a problem and I'm going to like speak about it. And a lot of times it's these things that are affronts to this kind of third house subject matter of people not being treated fairly, conservation stuff. And who knows, when my Mars finally goes direct, who knows what I'll be saying. I might like just be like spewing anger. I don't know. But I think for me, the way I see that, how you get that is that this is one of the values of learning your chart, because when you see those aspects to your ascendant, that is that point within yourself where you are merging that upper hemisphere with the lower hemisphere. So if I don't have a healthy way to express my anger, my Leo house, and this is just to touch on kind of like the medical astrology thing, because the third house is associated with the moon, which is associated with fortune in the body and physicality. Leo is my heart, and Mars is the blood and the circulatory thing, and my blood pressure could get too high, and I could definitely have a cardiac situation, which is actually a real concern. That's something that I am trying to learn how to deal with, this repressed frustration, because it is actually manifesting that way, because my blood pressure is starting to get borderline high. And I'm looking at my chart and I see this and I know this. But this is it. And I think that looking at the theme of Monday, Virgo is really associated with self-care of the body. And even though I don't have Virgo in the third house, some of those third house topics are, one thing is rituals of bodily self-care, which we sometimes think about as a sixth house thing, but I'm becoming to see that it is very much more personal in the third house, because that's of that aspect to the first house, right? The first house doesn't aspect the sixth house. That's a whole other realm of health and healing. Third house are those rituals of self-care. You know, it's that meditation practice that I do to help my blood pressure go down. It's a dietary choice of, oh, I'm going to eat these things. It's, you know, it's all those little kind of things that you are doing to, one, connect and really ground yourself into the body. You have Mercury there, and I know from hearing you talk, you study that. You love nutrition. You love herbs and stuff.
Yeah, the ruler, Jupiter, who rules the Sagittarius, which is my third, is in the 11th. And like I was sharing, is surrounded by Hecate and then Circe on the other side, which is when I make chocolate for people, I sell chocolate to people, and I give them like wisdom that I have on how I made my own sauerkraut, or like a morning potion for, I don't know. And people know me for that. And even, you know, the 11th house being a larger community, people have contacted me once to receive some cake that I was offering. And that was someone I didn't know at all. And interestingly, the cake was, I named it Demeter, or Demi's cake, because this is the name of the child who was receiving the cake, which was totally like me. My chart has, you know, that deep dive into the void, into the Scorpio. Yeah.
So those are just things to think about with the connecting that third house with the first house. And then I just wanted to also touch on, because in our chat discussion, we talked a lot about the dark goddess figures and some of the more quote unquote witchy figures, which have been ostracized in society. And like Hecate, Circe is more common, but I think it's really pronounced Kirka. You know, Medea, the fortune telling, you know, kind of witchy women. And, you know, there has, in the theme of Monday, there is that pressure coming down from the joy of Saturn in the 12th, which is that feeling of ostracism. But at the same time, it's that kind of hermetic alone time, you know, hermit time of that self-care, bringing that there to that, you know, having your body be the temple. And what are the rituals to celebrate your body as a temple, as enclosing the spirit? And I've been thinking a lot about the mythology of Isis and how she's the mother, which is like a moon figure, but she's also kind of this witchy, you know, magician woman. And she does all these magical things, and she travels around to protect her son Horus while she's being persecuted by family members, essentially. And that these are all things that are very kind of like third housey, in how she learns to connect with other people to create her own tribe, you know. And it's how you connect that through that kind of supportive sextile of yourself to your tribe, and how you can pull your tribe in to help you with your with understanding how to take care of yourself in your greater environment. So, I mean, I feel like that was just like a whole big download, so I'll let other people jump in.
Well, so what Holly just did is the third house. She just communicated with her tribe. And she immediately was right there for someone to answer question. And I feel like part of what I was saying in one of my posts this week was like, we've been talking about trauma response. And in the last session, we talked about like the trauma response of looking at someone who's homeless and then like bringing them into your home and then therefore taking away their own descent experience of being a homeless person in the street. I mean, yeah, Britt was talking about that really well. Well, the trauma response of the third house is to not have any tribe, to not have someone to talk to have like a really strong, extreme independent, like I'm not part of any group. I don't need to ask for help. I don't need to have questions or have a session or have a healing session or anything. So the third house is like what we're doing. The Galactic Shaman Astrologers are a group, and we talk to each other and we help each other. We may disagree completely. There's some things I disagree with Demetra about that I shared with the group. And that's fine, because the teacher relationship is not like, and you should all agree with me. You know, Demetra and I went around on a lot of things, being the way that she did things, very methodical, Saturnian, strict teacher, whereas I tend to be more intuitive, you know, different kind of energy. But for me, the third house angels, just to get back to angels also, are plants and animals. So the third house angels are not celestial beings. The third house angels are like the horse is an angel. The cougar is an angel. The slug, the ant, the spider. And I think about Native American or other indigenous groups, like the raven is the messenger, not the celestial being. But the raven, when I was with Ulakai Brendan Murray in Australia, and we were going to these holy places together, the ravens would all come, and the ravens were the angels. There were no like, you know, archangel this and archangel that for Ulakai Brendan Murray. It was like, what is appearing? The rocks, the land formations, the rivers those are the third house angels. And a lot of my like battle goddess Venus there is like that, you know, like battle goddess having come up from a lot of suffering, having met Ereshkigal, and then going, the animals are suffering and the animals are the angels. That's why I appear as I do. And in between every session, because third house Sagittarius needs to walk, I walk. Like I will walk the forest. I do a session with you, I walk the forest. That's the only way I can get my like physical hygiene okay again, because third house Sagittarius is like, I need to move. And that is also what Holly was talking about. Like you'll have to interpret your own chart, but the sextile from the ascendant is in the third house of with ease and grace, how do I breathe? Okay, do you understand that? So that's why you got to really know your third house or you can't breathe. Okay, go ahead, folks.
One way that I was thinking about possibly interpreting the axis of the third and ninth houses, is Apollo as the ninth house, the sun god, and then Mercury as the third house, which doesn't seem to make sense at first, but there's like some syncretistic connections to Mercury and the moon. So for example, like in the Egyptian mythology, Thoth was originally a moon god, but comes to be connected to Mercury for reasons that I can't remember. But what was my point? Oh yeah, so in his mythology, as like the trickster or thief image of Mercury, he has this relationship with Apollo where he steals Apollo's sacred cows, and Zeus rewards him, or there's like a trade where he discovers the lyre and gives it to Apollo, and in exchange he gets the Caduceus staff, which is the twin snakes, which is kind of like the blending of two different things, or like masculine and feminine typically. which I think has like quite strong Orion imagery, which probably connects to the Al-Malam and the other two stars in Orion. So I think there's something about the third house could be the quote unquote answer to the duality problem, or the kind of healing of that Orion wound, because it's passed from the ninth house or the god to the third house of the goddess. And that's how you kind of access that energy. And then you could further probably consider it with the blending of Aphrodite and Mercury creating the hermaphrodite, which is potentially connected to symbology with like the star Merkaba and stuff. But then further, if we think about the moon connecting to Cancer, I've been thinking about Cancer as the scarab beetle, and therefore a symbol of immortality. And typically the dung that it's rolling would be connected to the sun because it's to do with Ra. But I was wondering, perhaps similar to what Holly's saying about Isis, there's the mythology about Isis kind of usurping Ra and becoming the font of magic. So if the thing that the scarab beetle is rolling is the moon instead of the sun, and I would say that the way that you would see that most clearly would be the moon in Capricorn, because if the moon's in Capricorn, then Cancer has to like fully face this thing that it's birthed that could look quite hideous or disgusting. And it would furthermore, if the scarab beetle is connected to immortality, then that's like the undoing of that, which would connect into the things we're talking about of going into the idol place, and extinction. So perhaps like the mother wants to self-perpetuate and nurture and, you know, have these continuous cycles, which could be good in some ways, but cycles could also kind of like trap you in a system that maybe you don't want to be trapped in. So that's kind of needing to face up to that shadow, which then I guess goes back to the trickster. My internet's going a bit funny, but like the trickster kind of thief stuff, things that are a bit like taboo or not necessarily well received. I don't know if that all necessarily connects together. It kind of does in my mind, but I don't know how to explain it, I guess. Yeah.
Well, yeah, so you're all hearing Daniel's Mercury. So I love his Mercury because it's very all over the place, and it needs to have like reflection back to another person to get the prophetic nature of Daniel's Mercury. And he knows a lot of mythology, so unless you're able to follow mythology like at lightning speed, like Daniel does, you may not have any idea what he's talking about, but you have to listen to it again because he picks all these pieces that he's trying to merge together so that we can get the big view. One of the posts that I posted this week was about the death goddess, and that you can't know the goddess without knowing death. And the scarab beetle, if I'm remembering correctly, has something to do with the eternal life, but also it's through the recognition of death. It's through the recognition of those processes. And I've had an experience, also very third house, with a golden scarab beetle coming to me. And I have a photograph of it. And it was like green emerald and gold. And when you flipped it over, the other side of it was like a jewel, like pure gold. And so my experience that weekend, by the way, was the weekend I totally gave up ascension as the process that I wanted. I totally and I've written about it again and again, that ascension is not what I want. And that was the weekend the scarab beetle appeared. And it was about what I really want is to really know the depth of the experiences, all the emotions, the darkest places, that I don't need to be in the light, because I'm that in all the other dimensions. I'm here to be like that deep death goddess ritual experience. And when we did the video of, as Beth Ann so beautifully said, you know, making friends with Lady Death, I do think that we're in this Neptune and Pisces phase right now, where we're all thinking that we're going to possibly have a golden age, and it all has to do with, you know, free technology and food replicators and all of these things that I used to talk about. I heard a video of myself saying, don't worry, we won't need firewood because we'll all have free energy soon. And I heard myself saying, I actually made this video, we won't have to grow gardens anymore because we'll all have food replicators. And I realized that my dark night of the soul was when I was pretending to be the light. And I said that to a client this week, and she was like, what? And I said, my dark night of the soul was when I was pretending that I wanted to ascend and eat out of a food replicator. And that is when the scarab beetle came to me. So I don't know what that means, Daniel. I'm just, right now I'm actually acting out of like a divination place of the third house. Like something really profound about that when I realized I'm here for the descent. Anybody want to jump on that?
Yeah, I will. Yeah, I really feel that, like that descent with my moon, I've got my rising sign is Cancer, and my moon is opposing that. And what Daniel said about the scarab beetle rolling the moon, like it's rolling the moon, and that, I can't quite say it how he said it, but I understood it, and that really like felt right. It's like that's the descent, that's looking at the crone darker wisdom parts. And yeah, I can't articulate it like Daniel can, but with Virgo being in my third house, and you know that's sextile to the ascendant, with the death goddesses being there. So I've got Hecate, I don't know if I said that right, I've got Mora, dark moon Lilith, black moon Lilith, and Lilith, and my mother's asteroid name. And it was like that was that deep sudden ripping away in my childhood of my mother. And from me being able to understand that with my ascendant, and I'm slowly starting to understand that is what gives me life, is like that death gives me life, and like knowing why that happened, knowing the bigger picture and the unfolding of that. And I do feel what Daniel said about the cycles are good, but then you can get trapped in them, and that's something I need to unravel a bit more, because it's like you enjoy the cycles. Like I'm really starting to enjoy the seasons. Yeah, I'm not quite sure if like what's good and what's bad, but then what is good and what is bad. Yeah, the death goddess is something that I think we all need to look at and allow to be. And with my so you said about the ruler of that sign. So the ruler of Virgo is Mercury for me, who's in the 11th house, and my 11th house is Taurus, which is all like farming and agriculture. And then that's something that I'm really passionate about. So that makes a lot of sense to look at that and look at how your ascendant is a figure to that. Yeah, the scarab beetle, that's a strong one. Thanks.
I'm just going to jump in for a minute since my third house is Leo and my sun is in the 8th house. So one of the things that it brings to me is that kind of appreciation of the letting go cycles as well as the growing cycles. And that is kind of like that dark feminine and this kind of the more dark or deathing phases of life that we kind of want to not look at. And I think ultimately we make judgments about what is good or bad. But one of the things that you come to find in the 3rd house is that the whole experience is good, even though there are parts of the experience that you subjectively experience as negative or bad. So having like my kind of a crash course in this lifetime on these like letting go or deathing experiences, it's about learning to maybe let go of what was and examining my emotions around why I'm holding on to certain things and certain feelings or certain life circumstances or material things. And that actually is a good skill to learn because you can't hold on to everything or you stay in one place and you become stagnant. And sometimes holding on to that beautiful spring day doesn't allow you to experience the colors of the fall, is one way to put it. And it's seeing the beauty in all the change and all the different seasons and all the different experiences, which if you have a judgment on what is that peak experience, you limit yourself to other experiences. Or if you buy into a judgment of something being negative or corrupt or evil, you may miss out on something else that has a beauty or a gift for you. And so there has been, like times where there have been unfortunate things that have happened in my life, but I have learned to find the gift in that and the beauty in those moments, which to me is akin to, watching the leaves fall off the trees in the fall here in New England, and it gets dark and the trees are all just bare limbs and everything is cold. But I've learned to learn the beauty of that winter darkness. And there are other times, and I think you can, everyone can just self-reflect. What are times when, there you walk into that darkness and yet you find after you were there and you experience it that there was a gift there or a beauty there for you. And to me, that is kind of the power of the descent and the power of the journey into the dark, is that you kind of meet that and you find that something that you had judged one way is different. And even though the experience may be tough, you walk away with something and that you actually may be the better for it. But that is my experience with it.
Yeah, so I'm going to speak to Lucifer again on the whole descent thing. So it's always really terrifying for a client that I run Lucifer in their chart. They get their chart and they're going, oh my God, Lucifer. Oh my God. And sometimes Lucifer is conjunct like someone's name in your life. So the personal name asteroid of someone who lives with you is conjunct Lucifer. And well, you know, very soon I have a session that I'm going to need to address that. So the personal name asteroid conjunct Lucifer is that potential place of deep descent for you, and you live with Lucifer, okay? And Lucifer is causing you a lot of problems, and you know, you live with Lucifer. And to me, I want to say that is valuable material you can't get anywhere but Earth School. Earth School is that place to look into that and experience the, like, wow, real dark stuff that I don't have any possibility of experiencing anywhere else. And for me, the third house is what, you know, because my son is there, that's kind of what I illuminate, is like the death process of that deep descent is probably quite valuable for you, and you wouldn't want to miss it. But except what goes on here is that people tend to, you know, really value being happy and saying positive things. And that's the whole Abraham Hicks thing. And then, or you know, I've also written about, I don't know, Dr. Supernatural. I can't remember his name right now, but I've had a lot of clients who've gone to all of Dr. Supernatural's things, and then, you know, bad stuff happens in their life, and they think that somehow that they're a failure. And I no, you're successful. You, in your soul contract, have this deep descent with this person. Like, becoming supernatural actually is also in the Yoga Sutras as something to avoid. In the Yoga Sutras, it says that those supernatural powers and your attachment to them is also doom. Very interesting. They're called the siddhis. And last year I wrote a blog about all the siddhis that are potentially really dangerous, because once you get them, you get really fascinated with yourself and you think like that you're more something or another. But I would say the real siddhi, which means magical power of being on planet Earth, is to be able to live with someone who's suicidal. Okay, so I've got sessions and clients like that. And you live day after day with someone who's trying to kill themselves. And you're afraid to leave the house because they're going to commit suicide. And that is the kind of astrology that I do, because my benefic, the steersman of my ship, and my son are in the third house. So for me, I don't try to get them to focus on, oh, just call on Archangel Michael and he'll defeat Lucifer and you'll get along with your so-and-so who is suicidal right now. So that's how I do it as an astrologer. Like, I go to those deep, dark, shadowy places that nobody wants to talk about, and I look for the gold there. Like, there's really, really gold in that situation. Now, is it stressful? Does it ruin your mental health? Does it ruin your love life? Yeah, potentially. And yeah, people are going to die. Because as we said in the other two videos, that's also the greatest magic of planet Earth, is that you have physical body and it's gonna die. So facing death is the ultimate mystery school experience here on planet Earth. So the death goddesses, the darker, more shady feminine, like Medea, which I have conjunct my son, is, you know, that's how it is for me. Like, let's look into betrayal. Let's look into murder. And it's very unpopular to say, you know, oh, look at this beautiful Pleiadian starseed, Jeffrey Dahmer. And that's also my Uranus in the first house. I can't help it but to be like, yeah, we're all starseeds, even the murderers. Okay, people following me on that, like the depth experiences. the falling of the leaves. Like, so okay, I'll continue. So for instance, if I give you an oracular session and I don't look at your chart and I just make up some fabulous thing that's coming for your love life, love is coming for you soon. You know, that's a popular one. And all of these other ridiculous things. And I just don't look at the chart and say, well, you know, it looks like you got potential damnation coming. You got a major descent. You're probably going to face your worst fears. You may have an infidelity experience. The sacred marriage bed may be hijacked completely. Your husband may be having an affair right now. I see it in your chart. That's not particularly a popular reading, right? But that's the kind of astrologer that I am, because the luminaries in the third house of, like, the goddess knows all of that stuff. And that's the worms in the compost that is really important to the Earth Mystery School. So anybody want to pick up from there?
Yeah, I'd love to. I think going back to this Mars that I was talking about, which for me is also retrograde in the ninth house. On the star Aldebaran that I was talking to Lolita about, the fixed star, is also seen as the Archangel Michael star, which is interesting. So Mars rules my second house, which is where I have a stellium in Scorpio. So it's really important. I realized that there is, and what Harley, what you were saying about repressed anger, it's true. And in Gemini, it's like this sort of the electrical pulses in the body, right? The kind of nervous system. And if I can't, if I say, like in situations, there's like really airy kind of Gemini in the night, how really airy kind of dualistic scenarios, I can see that in spirituality, and it really bothers me. But the thing is that it's like there's a very strong feeling there, but because it's really internal, how to act that. And the only way that I found really good ways of dealing with it is communicating through this third house. So when I communicate, then I can start to, particularly writing, I can start to unravel what's going on. It's like that kind of journaling, communicating thing. But there's a real strong need, the scorpionic need, to go into the taboo. So it's really like powerful kind of energy, but it's quite a scary energy, because it feels like I often have this sense that I'm a bulldozer in a room, but no one knows. It's quite an ominous feeling, and I feel like I'm here and I'm destroying something, but no one else knows, and I don't even know because I try and ignore it. And I think it's that really interesting that really interesting need to come back to that place of going into the shadow and the depth, which I personally feel quite comfortable with as far as I've experienced so far. Yeah. So particularly when I'm communicating in the third house, I'm wanting to communicate the things that are in the shadow, but it's really like, the question for me is, how much can I open myself to that, to allow that to come through, particularly when it's, for me, conjunct Juno, which in the ninth house, which is in the third house, sorry, it's all on like 9 degrees, so it gets a bit confusing with the number 9. Is coming back to the yoni, the Juno, the womb, and Black Moon Lilith is there too. So it's really coming back to the womb. And also what interests me is, how is the womb being hijacked by multidimensional focus or obsessions, and how can we've done that to ourselves, and how have, you know, those external creations hijacked the goddess womb of society, and the way that the womb functions and plays in the whole for example, in child rearing, or in cycles of school and work, like 9 to 5, and then the weekend, and all that kind of is just so corrupt to me. It's like, that's like death. To me, death is that, as opposed to the taboo and the shadow. I'd rather be writhing in it than doing the cycles of like that. There's far more, there's life in that for me, exposing that truth. But yeah, finding the expression for that anger in helpful ways is a journey of mine, because it's either gets stuck or it goes a bit crazy. So again, self-care coming back in, and you know, back into nourishment and food and nurture. And actually, I think my Mars by progression has gone into Taurus, retrograding into Taurus in my 8th house, so which is perfect, because that is the whole revolution of food, and in the sensual foods of the Venusian foods. Yeah, so particularly been looking at foods for the nervous system and for the brain, just for the impulses through the body to help with that kind of electrical energy that I've been feeling a lot of, which kind of links back to Aquarius in a way. Yep, been thinking a bit about Aquarius recently.
Okay, so I'm going to try to recap some things. The galactic shaman astrologers also got into, like what Emmeline was talking about, the womb and the overpopulation issue on the planet. And I would say that the 3rd house, looking to nature and ecology for its kind of spirituality, I would say that the 3rd house can also be like the natural contraception techniques that the sorceress was in charge of. And the sorceress could make love charms, or she could also make contraceptions, or she could also make poisons. So the 3rd house, the vulva, the kind of the Viking age female shaman, she went from town to town and farm to farm, and she brought like herbal remedies to heal you. She also, in some of the crowns of those ancient women, they had poisons. So in, like, if you look in the archaeological data abound those shamanesses, they also had like hallucinogens. So they would have like a pouch on their hip with a bunch of hallucinogens. So they were in charge of those kind of things. So that's very 3rd house content. And we've been asked, the galactic shaman astrologers have been asked again to like address the population issue. So maybe we'll go there, certainly not in this session. But I feel like the 3rd house, house of the goddess, we need to change a lot of the stories, because the 3rd house is like the stories and the fables and the mythology that you're told when you're a child. And just today, I had a client session with, in the background, she had like Cinderella getting her slipper from Prince Charming. And she was really crashing, and I can see it in her chart, from a recent divorce, bankruptcy, and realizing that her husband was not faithful to her. And I said, well, look at the story that you've been told and lived on, is this Disney princess fairy tale of the prince will come and save you. And I said, by the next session with you, I want you to change that picture to the shadowy, dark feminine holding her blade with like a death scene and letting go of something. And her real power is like returning to the crone, because you're entering your cronehood, right? You're entering your cronehood. I don't want to see Cinderella in her blue ball gown with her slippers that she cannot get some work done in. So I think part of the third house discussion that I'd like to have with the galactic shaman astrologers at some point is those early childhood stories that we may need to rewrite. And I want to point people to a couple of books that I posted today with some of those mythological stories that are like deeper and darker. This is a book that I use before Google and Wikipedia kind of like, you know, took the myths and made it what they wanted. So there are some good books of women's classical mythology. And I would love for people to tell the story of Medea to their children rather than Snow White, who gets poisoned by her evil stepmother and waits for the prince to kiss her. Because one thing I was really pissed about with my first divorce was I told my mom, why did you tell me those stupid Disney stories? There is no Prince Charming. So the third house is the early childhood stories that we raise an entire culture on. And we really need to rewrite those. So maybe the galactic shaman astrologers will work on that a bit. Anybody have a closing statement to that? Okay, thank you all so much for your work and for showing up again to give this astrological knowledge to the planet Earth. All right, bye-bye for now.